Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming tonight. Welcome to the online launch of Real Gwynedd, the 26th title in the Real series, which has mapped Wales and various parts of Great Britain in its own kind of particular and not to say unique way. It feels kind of odd to be launching a book about a particular place or locale on the internet, which is a place with no locale at all, and no population, lots of visitors, and no length of history to speak of. But needs must, as they say. So I'm waving to you from Bridgend. I'm waving the book at you from Bridgend as well. And when we commissioned Rhys to write this book, and when the typescript arrived, I asked myself what it might tell an English-speaking Englishman from South Wales about the country, not to say the kingdom of Gwynedd. And the answer was a heck of a lot. And that's due in large part to Rhys's probably unique viewpoint. We've got historical and topographic Gwynedd, written by archaeologist Rhys, who has searched out any number of interesting and informed angles about the Romans, the medieval princes, the county's castles, slate quarrying, Snowdonia, all the things you might anticipate. But there's also a less familiar, more contemporary Gwynedd, perhaps, viewed through the lens of popular music, written by punk rocker Rhys. And if that sounds a bit anarchic, it's actually the contact between the music and the political and everyday which underlies this aspect of Real Gwynedd. But let's see how the Gwynedd kaleidoscope falls tonight, and I'll hand you over to Peter and Rhys.
Diolch, Mick. Noswaith pawb. Good evening, everyone. This is a real book, and the first in the Real series came out in 2002. So we're a good 20 years down the road, and as you've heard, 26 titles. The very first one was this one. It was Real Cardiff, written not quite on a whim, but certainly not intended to launch what it ended up launching, which was the long series. So what have we got? We've got books on all the places you can think of in Wales: Llanelli, Newport, Merthyr, Aberystwyth, Port Talbot, Wrexham, Powys, Chester, yes, that's in Wales, Liverpool, yes, that's in Wales. And then we began to move out: Glasgow, Bloomsbury, Barnsley, Oxford, Cambridge, and the South Bank. And coming soon, Real Hay-on-Wye and Real Dorset. But right now, we're in the middle of a terrific publication. This is Real Gwynedd. So what are real books? Well, they're psychogeographies, they're alternative guidebooks, histories, rambles, journals, novellas of praise and promotion, collections of authorial observations, intelligent, deep, penetrating reportage, analyses of just how places tick, all of these things. Now, I've always asked authors who are participating in the series to write how they see. Don't be detached, become involved. Make the books your own, not any kind of official view. Be engaging, entertaining, be fearless. And I think Rhys has managed in this volume to be all of those things. So Rhys, if you don't mind me saying, this sort of book, written in English, doesn't sound anything like your territory. How did you get involved?
Well, I was aware of the Real series. I'd obviously read Real Cardiff. And I think Mike Parker's Real Powys showed the possibility. You made that point about the urban and the rural landscape. Mike's book on Powys, I thought, that's the key to looking at rural Wales. And I thoroughly enjoyed Mike's book, thoroughly enjoyed it. I grew up as a youngster in Llanfair Cerinion in eastern Montgomeryshire. But coming back to the sort of psychogeography of it, that sense, looking, seeing, being in part of a place, actually, Peter, it was quite easy, I totally got the concept. And I must admit now, it was so enjoyable, you know, heading off to Abersoch, thinking, what am I going to do in Abersoch? And the trigger there being Iwan from Cowboys Rhos Botwnog mentioning how on Llŷn everything is on a small scale and you can jump across rivers.
Yeah.
So the piece on Abersoch is based on a trip following the river from its mouth at Abersoch to its source to see whether it's actually possible to jump it. And once you've got that map, it's brilliant. It was a long day following the Soch. And
Did you jump it?
I failed to jump it because at source up at Cefn it's so reedy. It doesn't really have banks. It just sort of spreads out. And I realized, even for real Gwynedd, I'm not going to jump and fall backwards into the Soch. But, oddly enough, Peter, it was so easy to get into that space.
This is terrific, because I worried that trying to put somewhere rural into an urban series, that was going to be a challenge. We'd seen Mike succeed. We'd seen Tony Curtis succeed with South Pembrokeshire. We'd seen John Osmond succeed with Preseli, but they weren't easy battles for them. But you've done it terrifically well. Now, changing the subject just slightly from psychogeography, although only slightly, like me, you've been fascinated by investigating the sites of what was. Well, in fact, that's what you do being an archaeologist. But I'm talking about much more recent sites of what was, particularly in the music world. Now, I recall myself trying to track down where John Lennon stood when he came with the Beatles to Cardiff, precisely which part of the stage did he stand on and what's there now. And I did eventually find out where it was, and it's currently a line of 3 coin-in-the-slot massage chairs in an arcade. No plaque, nothing. We don't celebrate such things in Wales, and we should. Now, what's your take on that? Because you've done a fair amount of this looking for traces in car parks, haven't you?
Again, I think I read your book, The Roots of Rock from Cardiff to Mississippi and Back Again. And again, you mentioned these venues, these recording studios, these homes that tended to be car parks. And I started laughing because I thought, well, this is exactly both my experience traveling around Gwynedd. All these places have gone, they're now car parks. And I'd actually started to include these in the book before I read your book. So it was almost like confirmation, you're on the right track. And I noticed Alan Holmes from the Flaps and Ectogram is with us tonight. Alan kindly helped me find a venue called the Jazz Room, which is now somewhere beneath the sort of landscaped lawn of Pontio Theatre in Bangor. And that was an important venue in the early 80s. Alternative post-punk bands played there, but it's been landscaped out of existence. And I just couldn't remember where it was. And it's exactly the same, Peter. Where was the stage? And that's a venue where a very, very early version of Catatonia did one of their first ever gigs.
So it's important.
Cerys Matthews has performed at the Jazz Room. But today, if you found the location of the stage, it would be somewhere on the bank going into Pontio, landscaped. And I found with this book, it was far easier to develop these ideas with company. So somebody like Alan coming along, I'm sure bypassers must have thought we were insane because we were pointing into the middle of nowhere going, that would have been the stage, that would have been the backstage entrance, that would have been the loading bay or whatever it was. And there's something quite interesting about these things that have disappeared, but that were really culturally important at the time. And they're not necessarily documented. People like Alan and myself would remember these things. Cerys would remember that gig. But they've disappeared. And there's something about these stories that even today, you know, you could argue Cerys' show on Six Music is possible today, partly because she played in the Jazz Room in Bangor in 1993.
Yeah.
She'd have got there anyway. But it was part of those little triggers that moved culture forward, I guess. So that's really interesting, isn't it? It's to do with opening up your eyes, isn't it? And imagination and the search for and the conversations. And again, once you tune in, these things are really fascinating, absolutely brilliant.
So this is how then you link your work as somebody in the punk world with one of your jobs as an archaeologist, is it?
Yeah, I don't see the difference, you see, because there used to be a chap next door to us now in Carnarvon, passed away now. But his conversation was always, when I'd pop out of the door with two Rastafarians or something that'd been staying overnight who were in a band, he'd always look at me and go, Rhys, what exactly do you do? And he'd say this on a weekly basis. Well, what exactly do you do? And then over the years, it boils down really to communicating. So if I'm up at hill forts with school kids, I don't see any difference in that, discussing a hill fort with them, or when we were in Andreven, the band on stage in Berlin. It's all to do with communicating, relaying information about this place. So we're always of Wales. That's the thing. We may have rebelled against it, may still be rebelling against bits of it, but we're always of this place. So that's always central, and it's to communicate and to look at things. That's the key point, isn't it? Is to, I think you mentioned the word challenge. It's not a challenge for the sake of challenging, but it's to run free of those constraints that the Methodists would have imposed on us. And it's still the case, isn't it? We've got to break those chains. So whatever it is, whatever constraints the Welsh in all their varied forms will try and impose, there's a role for some of us somewhere just to non-conform, isn't it? The great tradition of non-conformity.
Yeah, our tradition, indeed. So who have you aimed the book at? Have you aimed it at the insider, or have you aimed it at the outsider? Is it aimed at the native, or is it aimed at the visitor who's never been here before? And do you see any conflict between these two audiences?
Great question. I don't see any conflict. The answer from me would be, I would hope that anyone who reads the book enjoys it, learns from it, is inspired by it, gets an OS map, and they go out wandering. So it doesn't matter where you come from. I was in the quarries today looking for rock cannons above Dyffryn Nantlle, and I met a lady from the Lake District just walking. And she asked me, she realized, I don't know whether I looked knowledgeable, but she obviously realized I was up to something. And she said, are there any books about the quarries? And I said, well, start with Dafydd Gwyn, go on to Alan Richards, the Gazetteer of Welsh Slate, looking at Archwilio. And she was from the Lake District. And in 2 seconds, I was able to say, well, you look at this book, and that website, and there's your key, there's your map, there's your access to understanding that old building was a way shed, or that building was part of, it was a railway station for the trains in the quarries. It's there to be discovered. So I honestly don't aim at anybody. My aim really is that book opens little kissing gates along narrow little paths that they haven't been along before. And if I can do that, that's job done.
Yeah. So Gwynedd has, I'm speaking as somebody who doesn't come from Gwynedd. Gwynedd has a tradition of thinking of itself as different from the rest of Wales. And compared to the south, many Gwynedd locals insist that Gwynedd is the real Wales and the rest is a land of pretenders somehow. So what's your take on this?
Superb question. One of the things that I used to use in punk rock days, I think, there's no copyright on Welshness. There's no one form of Welshness. There's no right, wrong. There's no correct version of. And bless him, I know a lot of people have issues, but David Ellis Thomas, we had a conversation years ago about anyone who lives in Wales would be a citizen. And I quite like that idea, because it doesn't matter then if you've moved in from Japan, or, you know, your parents were from Treorchy, but you'd been brought up in Barnsley. It really doesn't matter. As a citizen, you're engaged with the place. You can play your role in culture, doing things, being part of communities. Honestly, Peter, I don't see it like that. I absolutely do not see a correct Welshness, a right Welshness. When we started with the music scene in the 80s, there was a huge debate, you know, that we weren't really proper Welsh, or it wasn't Welsh what we were doing. There's a whole nonsensical debate in the early 80s. And then slowly but surely, that debate, those arguments just got destroyed by ignoring it and creating something new. So again, I would never, ever accept, you know, that any bit of Wales has, every single bit of Wales has got a story, something interesting, a dynamic landscape, culture. There's no, Gwynedd has no, you know, has the highest peaks, and that's about it, isn't it?
That's a good answer to a googly question. Yeah, that was. Let's get you to read some sections. How about a slice from the Capel Salem section, the bit about that famous painting, page 69.
Okay.
All of you at home, page 69.
Okay, good to go.
Maybe maybe the book down, because we can't see your face.
Oh, you can't, right.
Yeah, good.
I'll do it this way so I can see. At one time, I imagine every other Welsh household had a copy of Sydney Colonel Vosper's Salem painting hanging proud in their living room. Our family did not, and this was something I rectified recently. It cost me 40 quid in an antique shop in Penmaen Mawr. Battered gold frame, faded, measuring 40 by 48 centimetres. It now hangs proudly in my living room at home in Caernarfon. Kitsch value alone, it's worth the 40 quid. As a talking point, a conversational tool, it's priceless. Salem, built in 1850, extended in 1860, is the Baptist chapel at Cefn Cymera, Llanbedr, near Harlech. The chapel building has the feel of time and memories hanging on, lingering in midair. Quiet, secluded, wooded. The road past Salem leads up to Cwm Nantcol and ends at Maes y Garnedd, home of Colonel John Jones, one of the signatories of Charles I's death warrant. Salem is a place for quiet contemplation or a picnic. Quiet is something that's getting increasingly hard to find, even in our mainly rural Gwynedd.
Yeah.
So that one, you see, the Salem picture, Vosper's Salem picture, hangs in Lady Lever Art Gallery, and it was used to advertise soap successfully. But the actual chapel where Sian y Fawnog posed, she was paid to pose for this picture, still exists. It's remote, and it absolutely feels like you've just gone back to the 19th century. And they've got this little framed picture of Salem in the chapel. And I laughed when I went in, because I thought, almost as if to confirm that, yes, you're in the right place, because there's no signpost. You just end up at this little chapel. And just that fact, Maes y Garnedd up the road, Colonel John Jones, he was one of those people who signed Charles I's death warrant. So within that extremely remote area, Cwm Nantcol, you've got all these things to play with. And it's just fantastic. That's why I said it's good for a picnic. You can sit there and contemplate.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah. So one of the things I've noticed when I drive from the south to the north, I don't really feel that I'm in the north until I come up into Dinas Mawddwy. And it turns out, I didn't know this, one of the very first, earliest rock scene memories of mine was getting to know Derek Brown, and Derek Brown comes from Dinas Mawddwy. And you've got something to say about him and George Borrow on page 84, haven't you?
Yes. Derek Brown was in a band called Racaraquir. And Racaraquir, I think the name was created, they used to play sort of bluesy kind of music, but it was really it wasn't the 12-bar blues thing. It was a really rack and rack noise sound. His band were from Cardiff, and they played in Dinas Mawddwy Village Hall in about 1982 or 3, and I was the DJ before the band. So we have this joke. There's he's a fairly well-known writer, a guy called John Savage who lives in Anglesey. John's written about Beatles, Sex Pistols, Epstein, etc. John is someone we came across through the music scene, late 80s. But one of the jokes when I've driven around North Wales with John Savage is we go through these villages and he'll look at a village hall and he'll go, I suppose you've played there, Rhys, with your band. And the answer is always, actually, yes. Yeah, we did. It was 1990, whatever, Yeah. We've been around all these village halls. And the only connection with the village halls is, there was a gig there with Caerford, Aplygu, or whoever it might have been. And they're funny little places, aren't they? Because they're battered buildings, tin shed buildings, wooden buildings. And then for one night only, about 10 people turned up who were turned on by punk rock. And the other thing, I don't know whether I was inspired by Wild Wales, but it's in the back of your mind, isn't it? That's a great book, George Borrow, Wild Wales. Absolutely brilliant read.
Well, that's the model for the whole of the Reel series.
That's the model. Well, I think, Peter, it would be true to say that the whole writing process, I would have been aware of George Borrow and I would have been aware of Jack Kerouac. There was that sense, that image of Kerouac when they're having donuts on the top of the train and moving on has always been part of it. And, George Borrow, when he deals with Dinas Mawddwy, I think he says it's a dirty hole and he was pleased or glad to move on. And it's not like that today. Dinas Mawddwy is kind of pleasant, but it's also just underneath the A470. It's a funny place. And just up the road, Llan Mawddwy is the next parish up. And the notice board at Llan Mawddwy refers to 2 giants. Now, there's only about 3 houses in Llan Mawddwy, and I just couldn't work out how this little hamlet had 2 historical giants. And that's again, that's your twist, isn't it? When you're doing Real Gwynedd, you drive into Llan Mawddwy. This is the place with 2 giants, and you couldn't make it up.
No, indeed. So now you mentioned the A470 there. The A470, that was the title that I gave to the new literature information magazine that I published when I was running the academy. And why A470? Because it was the only thing we have in Wales that connects the north with the south. That was the subtext and the joke. Well, what's your take on it? You've got a section on page 94 on the A470.
Yeah. It's interesting with the A470, and I've addressed this. When we say we're going to Cardiff from North Wales, we say we're heading down the A470. And then when you actually realise the A470 starts in Llandudno, So we don't, if we're coming from Bangor and Carnarvon, we're not on the A470 until Trawsfynydd. But it's used as a metaphor, if you like, for that long journey, north or south. And again, it goes back to band days when we were doing gigs in Cardiff, in 1985 or something, and driving back overnight because we're all 23 and we're tough and we can drive all the way home straight after a gig.
Yeah.
And we would know every single turn. You'd know when you go down a third, when you go down a second, when you could put your foot down. And the aim was to leave Clwb Ifor Bach in Cardiff at 1 and be home by 4:30 or 5 or something. But we knew every bump, every corner on that road. I'll just read a little bit from... so it is important, the A470, isn't it? It's the artery. Heading south from Trawsfynydd, the A470 trundles towards its final destination, the seafront at Cardiff, passing through the South Gwynedd villages and towns of Bron Aber, Ganllwyd, Llanelltid, Dolgella, the only town, Dinas Mawddwy, bypassing, and finally Mallwyd before entering Powys. Much straightened and improved over the last 30 to 40 years, but it's still single carriageway as far south as Merthyr Tydfil, with only the final southern 26 miles operating as a dual carriageway. Officially known as the Cardiff to Glan Conwy Trunk Road, and at 186 miles long, the A470 is the main north-south artery linking Llandudno with Cardiff. Many still prefer to take the English route via the A49 south of Shrewsbury towards Ross and Wye, and then heading back into Wales. The A470 enters Gwynedd and the old county of Meirionnydd just west of the Crimea Pass, then passes through Blaenau Ffestiniog and Llan Ffestiniog before doing a sharp turn before doing a sharp turn just south of Maen Twrog and just north of Trawsfynydd at the junction with the A487. That's the road from Carnarvon. Many of us refer to the journey south to Cardiff as the A470, but depending on your starting point, it can vary as to when we actually join the route proper. Heading from Bangor to Cardiff, for example, involves almost 40 miles on the A487 before hitting the A470 proper. Songs have been written about the A470. Folk jazz funk singer Fleer David has a song called A Pedwar Saith Dim, which has a suitable thumping Motown beat for those embarking on the long haul north or south. Geraint Lyfgren a'r Enw Da, on the other hand, have a laid-back jazz feel to their song A470, probably more suited to sunny summer Sunday afternoon drives. Blues singer Steve Eves touches indirectly on the A470 with his song about a young lady taking a journey on the Traws-Cambria bus, which would inevitably lead to the bus being on the A470 for part of the journey if you went Bangor to Aberystwyth. So it's a little bit playing there, isn't it, with the A470? I always call it the A470 blues. It is the subject of great songs.
Yeah, it is. Now, while you've been reading that piece out, there's a bit of chatter been coming up on the questions here. A lot of interest from your reference to kissing gates. People talking about new ones being installed, farmers locking kissing gates against the public and how important they are. I mean, how often did you run into kissing gates when you rambled across Gwynedd in the writing of this book?
Oh, plenty. Giatia mochyn in Welsh. Giat mochyn is a pig gate, isn't it? So the pigs can't get through them. I've played in this book with that Southern soul thing of dusty gravel roads. It's not always the case. We do have tarmac on Llyn, of course, but I like that sort of imagery of dusty gravel roads. And it's the same with these little paths that go out of the way through the Kissing Gates. And it's extremely common. Today, for example, I walked around Nantlle Valley looking for rock cannons. These were black powder rocks that were fired during Victoria's Jubilee. And this afternoon, as an example, I went through 4 Kissing Gates. Yeah. And that's just in the Nantlle Valley. Quite often photograph them. So it's always a good sign. You see a Kissing Gates, go through and see where it leads.
Yeah, indeed. So that's an interesting image you're coming up with there. You're developing the idea of Gwynedd as the Welsh equivalent of the Deep South in the USA, but where the accent changes completely, sometimes speech becomes impenetrable, and the weather's different. Anyway, that aside, how green is Gwynedd, do you think? Are we in a land of wind turbines and nuclear power stations when we should be having a non-nuclear future? Or what's your take on that?
Yeah, we're not so green, are we, in Gwynedd? We're grey and rocky. I mean, if you think of Gwynedd, Eryri, Snowdonia, pretty well sits on most of it. Apart from the coast, north coast, west coast, and Llyn, you're pretty well. You've got Snowdonia just absolutely flat on top. And it's something, you mentioned that north-south journey. I think if you travel on the A470, come over from Dinas Mawddwy and you go over what's known as Bwlch Oer Drws, the Cold Door Pass, Bwlch Oer Drws, and then you come down towards Brythdir and Dolgella. And I've always felt that's the point. It's a bit like Story Arms when you're coming down from Merthyr. There are certain points on that journey when you realise we're now on the home stretch. But certainly from Bwlch Oer Drws upwards, it becomes rocky. It's the mountains, the craggy Eryri that we see. The greenery.
This is not Harry Webb's Green Desert, is it?
No. The greenery, you see, there's bits. Abergwyngregin, which is the furthest north that we cover in this book, you've got a coastal belt there of, at the most, 1.5 miles. And it goes from green fields to steep hills within that distance. So that's one of the things that you realise with Gwynedd is a very narrow coastal belt, that good agricultural land. Within a few miles, you're climbing up. And, you know, historically, that's been a huge factor where people have lived, where people have farmed, how they've been able to farm. And if you were painting very, very generally, you'd have to talk about Gwynedd being grey, or the colour of the slate, or the colour of the rocks. It is craggy.
Let's talk about Gwynedd in terms of the eco-greenness then. Tell us about the Chorus and the Centre for Alternative Technology, which is it's been there for a while. It's an exciting concept. That's page 83.
It is. That's an interesting one, Peter. I'll be honest now, that was the hardest thing to write about in the whole book. And I'll explain why, I guess. When we were kids, you know, you're going back to late 60s, early 70s, whenever CAT started, we'd go there, you know. And obviously when you're boys at 12 years old, completely immature, my memory is, you know, composting human waste. How funny, you know. And and Citroen cars, wasn't it? So we just saw places like that as being what we would call hippie. Not saying that it didn't have good things about it, but the way we saw it, you know, it was just Citroen cars and hippies. And then again, Mike Parker, interestingly, deals with it in his book, English Attitudes to Wales.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, Mike, in a way, as an English person who's moved into Wales, he can say things entitled to his opinion, obviously, but he can say things that I could never say. Because, you know, as a Welsh person, it would be borderline probably racist if I said them. And I really struggled with that section. I was almost at the point where I thought I can't put it in, and then I kept rereading it, and I thought, no, it's nuanced, it's not provocative, it's not sensational, it's nuanced, bit of humor. And I did try to sort of incorporate this idea. I'll probably should read a bit so you can see what I'm doing.
Go on then.
Remind me of that page, Peter.
Page 90, 83.
Let's just read a bit. So that was out of the whole book. The whole book. That's the only section where I had reservations, concerns, worries. Am I doing the right thing? Mm-hmm. I don't think you said anything, so I assumed then that it wasn't too bad. CAT, the Centre for Alternative Technology, may seem like an unlikely setting as a location for S4C's Welsh version of Question Time, Pawb a'i Farn. I have sat on the panel alongside Welsh politicians several times over the years, invited to voice an alternative viewpoint to the party line towing politicians. I've always enjoyed the thrill of an invited audience and the chance to spout some anarcho-punk theories on live TV. Pawb a'i Farn is filmed at different locations around Wales. We're at CAT during winter time, and the chance to wander around the site is lost as it's around 6 p.m. when I arrive for makeup, sandwiches, and a chance to shake hands and exchange niceties with the other guests. This would have been my most recent visit to CAT. We would often stop here with a family when the boys were young on one of those long north-south halls. CAT always seemed like a suitable place to use the cafe and let the kids out the car. As you'd expect from young boys, they were fascinated with the compost toilets. Established on an abandoned quarry site in the 1970s, CAT was set up with noble aims. At that time, alternative meant hippie. Growing concerns about the environmental impact of fossil fuels and questions of longer-term sustainability had instigated a worldwide process of rethinking and reappraisal. Eco-activism had taken root and was about to bloom. During our youth in neighbouring Montgomeryshire, CAT visits always seemed to be about composting the land with human manure and using windmills for power. Things have evolved, developed, and moved on. Climate change is real. We're all concerned, Welsh included. Since many, many years, this is no longer the preserve of beetle-driving, teepee-dwelling, in-comer English hippies. Still, there is a sense that CAT has some way to go to fully integrate with Welsh-speaking chorus. So it's not easy, that one.
No, it's not.
I feel awkward reading it, slightly. Mike Parker certainly challenges, you know, he goes much further than I do there. I don't know. That's something I don't know with that one.
It could be that the Welsh, we are automatically alternative, automatically in that frame of mind and that way of thinking, that it doesn't have to be imposed on us as a bright new idea. It's the way economically we've done things and carried on for centuries on centuries. That could be something to do with it. And you can only just say that, can't you?
Good point. I mean, our grandparents lived like that anyway. That's
right. That's it. That's right. You know, if we're far away, Wales is not a country of cities. Wales is hardly a country of towns even. But anyway, not going down that way. There's a couple of comments I want to pick up on the questions to pitch at you. Just bloody hell moment. And then a bit further down, I've got another question of a similar line. Somebody's asking about, where are we going now? About getting to places by public transport and what exciting things. This is from, hang on, I've almost got it, just a second. There we go. This is Gazella A, and she's saying, what's an exciting place to get to that I could see and I could get to preferably by public transport? So what's the wow moment in Gwynedd, and what are the obvious exciting places to go to?
Well, probably from the whole book, the underground trip to Chwarel Slater's Bwlch to see where they kept the National Portrait Gallery portraits during Second World War. And the local councillor, Erwin J., who's a legend in Blaenau Ffestiniog, he kindly took me underground to see these old vaults. And there's, very, very well-known photographs of Charles II on horseback being carried up to Bwlch Slater's, and going underneath the railway bridge, they had to deflate the tyres of the lorries in order to get the paintings underneath the railway arches. So that day, with Erwin, with hard hats, driving in a Land Rover to this adit, and then walking in underground was absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And the cables and the air filtration machines are still there underground. And we even came across one of the funniest things. There was a chemical toilet there, still with liquid. And you just thought, oh, here we go. And as an experience, wearing my hat as an archaeologist as well there, that was absolutely, a real highlight. But there's no public access. It was just lucky that I knew Erwin. And with lots of these people, I'm sure you have the same experience, Peter. When you ask, they just love being the tour guide. They love the excuse to take somebody else underground. So the permission was granted relatively easily. In terms of public transport, I was having a conversation yesterday about the piece that I've written about going up Snowdon in Real Gwynedd. And I took the bus from Caernarfon to the Snowdon Ranger path. It's the Pryddi route. Went up Snowdon, and then you'll see in the book, I head down to Llanberis because it's the only way I'm going to get a bus home. So one thing with navigating Gwynedd by public transport, you don't want to walk up from Llanberis and come down in Pryddi, you'll be stuck. If you get down to Llanberis, you can catch a bus every 30 minutes.
I know what you're talking about. I've done this myself.
You've got to have your wits about you if you're going cross country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one with public transport. If you drive down Llyn, heading for Aberdaron or Abersoch, it's an hour's drive down Llyn.
Starting where?
From about Caernarfon, or once you get onto the Llyn Peninsula. So from, there's no border, but if you actually went, you could argue where the Llyn starts. It's somewhere around Aberdesach, just west of Dinas Dinlle, and you're on the peninsula. It's an hour's drive.
Yeah.
And okay, it's not Route 66, but when you drive down Llyn, it does feel like this endless journey down, down, down. It's a brilliant journey. And I know it's on a small scale, but all the bits that were written about Llyn, they were full days.
Yeah.
That was a return at 7:30 p.m., because I was still writing in Llan, wherever on the Llyn.
Of course, when you were doing this, you took the leap, did you not? On page 142, and you went to Ynys Enlli, The island made of the bones of saints. Can you read a bit of that?
Yeah. Where's 100? I've got to admit, Colin, who operates the boat over Tenley, is an absolute star. He's one of the most entertaining people I've ever met in my life. He's of Enley. He's extremely knowledgeable. A couple of years ago, I had a job for Siop y Pethe in Aberystwyth. They were doing tours to Enley every Tuesday, and I got the job. So I was doing archaeological tours of Enley every Tuesday for the whole summer and crossing over on the boats with Colin. And in terms of dream job, it's one of those when I was asked, I just said, oh, can I think about that? Of course. It's one of those, how can you not enjoy going over to Enley every Tuesday? But Colin was so funny. I ended up, because I was with clients all day, I ended up in the cabin with Colin on the way there and back, because I'd be with the clients for the rest, maybe 7 hours. And I was thoroughly, thoroughly entertained. And on one occasion, Colin took me up into the lighthouse, which is not accessible to the public. And they still have the foghorn speakers there in the lighthouse. And Colin turns around and goes, have you still got your guitar? And I said, yes, of course. How about next time you come out, we plug your guitar in to the foghorn speakers? Now, of course, this hasn't happened, but that gives you how entertaining Colin is. And I said, well, you sort the plugs out and I'll bring my guitar. The idea of playing a gig through the lighthouse foghorn would have been brilliant. But
we have frozen, Rhys. Come on, come back.
Oh no. Mine's been freezing when I thought it was just me, or it was the last time, but this time it's obviously...
He's gone completely now. We were pretty much coming up to the end. I had one more question and I wanted to get him to read a bit from the piece he's written on Ynys Enlli. I mean, the concept of Rhys Mwyn plugging his guitar into a pair of foghorns and then letting the wildlife and probably the Irish as well hear what he sounded like from Enlli is extremely entertaining. It's the start of a whole surreal novel, I think. And he's still not back. Knows he pulled the plug out. What should we do, Sarah?
I'm not sure. So we've lost Rhys completely now, but he may be able to rejoin in a second.
He may be. We've got a good 5 minutes left to go.
Do you want to read some of the part on Enlli?
Where's his piece on Enlli?
And I'll let him back in as soon as he reappears.
I'll just read the start piece that Rhys has got here. But for those of you who don't know, Ynys Enlli, 20,000 saints are buried on Ynys Enlli, Bardsey in Norse. There is no English word for Enlli, none at all. Like Swansea and Anglesey, Bardsey is a Norse name. The Vikings must have passed through. It may be Iolo Morgannwg who first made the Arthurian connection with Enlli. Iolo has a lot to answer for. Stonemason, forger, poet, and if we were honest, we should emphasize talented forger of poetry. Maybe include fantasists and proto-situationalists, albeit unintentionally. To this day, historians and archaeologists alike are still untangling the web of historical mischief made up by Iolo. Many still believe that Enlli is Avalon, Ynys Afallon. This is where Excalibur, Arthur's sword, was forged. I have met many on Llyn who claim Arthur is buried on Enlli. Argue with them at your peril. Maybe King Arthur is all Iolo fantasy, but the citizens of Enlli did have their own king, at least 4 of them. And he goes on to detail who these kings are. This is the bit where Rhys takes the psychogeographical idea, this notion of messing around with the name and invoking Iolo Morgannwg, and then blends it into real history, which he's a great expert on. This book is a terrific read. It's a terrific read. The sections that he's got in the book, and there are many, many of these, generally short and sharp with good photographs. Something interesting and informative to say about just about everything. And you read this and you think, well, I would like to read volume 2. And I'm sure Rhys is thinking at the back of his head there about volume 2. Can you tell us, how do viewers, listeners, Zoomers get hold of their signed copy of this, Sarah? What do they have to do?
Well, there were some signed copies at Palace Print in Carnarvon, but I don't know whether they've sold out now or not, but I'm sure we could get Rhys to go back and sign some more. But I mean, the book is now available widely in bookshops in and around Gwynedd and wider Wales, or of course on the Seren website. Just post a link. Here we go. Rhys is back, so I'm going to let him back in.
Where's Rhys gone? I can't see him. Say something, Rhys, and your picture will appear.
He's just joining, so hopefully we'll have him in a second. Rhys, are you back?
Yes.
We're pulling this up to a close anyway at the moment. I wanted to ask Rhys about Cobb Records and the centre of the second-hand vinyl universe that North Wales had become, a subject which I'm sure he can talk to us about. Can you hear that, Rhys?
I can indeed. Yeah. Well, the obvious thing with somewhere like Cobb Records in Bangor, sadly gone. Similar to Spillers in Cardiff, Andy's Records in Aberystwyth. They were hubs, weren't they? You know, obviously buying records there, but that's how you found out about every single gig. In Cobb, on the sort of counter, they had gig posters just underneath the counter. And it was just as important to go in and read the posters as it was to go in and buy records. The importance of record shops is something else, isn't it? Because you'd meet people there, discuss the number of bands that we would have met in the record shop or other musicians that we'd have met. Very, very crucial spaces. And that's something that's obviously changed now in the digital world. The whole landscape, I guess, has changed, isn't it? It's difficult really to fully appreciate how absolutely central these places were
indeed.
to culture.
Indeed. No, we need to pull this together now, Rhys. I really enjoyed listening to you dive between your discussion of what some people would imagine to be the real history, the archaeological history, and then zoom back up again through much more recent musical occurrences, and to do the two in the same breath, as it were, to mix up this these functions that you have as being a Welsh musical guru and a tour guide and an archaeologist, all rolled up together. But putting all of those together, you have to name your best place in Gwynedd. Your best place, interpret that however you like. Where is it? You've got to go somewhere in Gwynedd, and it's going to be the last thing you see. Where's it going to be?
In that event, it would be Cilgwyn above Carnarvon, where my family come from originally, above the quarries, Nantlle Valley, Dyffryn Nantlle. And from Cilgwyn, the summit of Cilgwyn, you can see Holyhead Mountain, Mynydd Twr, on the west coast of Anglesey. You can see the Nantlle Ridge and the bulk of Snowdonia, that would be to your south and to your east. So Mynydd Cilgwyn, and there are other spots, it's what we call a 360-degree spot. On the summit, you can look in all directions. You can look down Llŷn, you can look over Snowdonia, you can look north and west over Anglesey. But my family come from Mynydd Cilgwyn. They were quarrymen. And I was raised in mid Wales, disconnected from all that. And it's only been recently, really, that I've re-engaged with the real roots. And I'm not a native of Gwynedd, and the Gwynedd natives know that. You know, it's
This
same
is
as
my
Carnarvon.
this is my first question when we came in and I asked you about the attitude from Gwynedd to people who came from elsewhere.
Well, that never changes, you see, which is one of the funny things. One of the beauties of being in a band, you were always a guest, weren't you? You would always come and entertain people, so you were welcome because you were the entertainment for the night. If it was anybody else who walked in the pub, it's, ooh, strangers in town. So the music and the tour guiding and my, whatever it is, profile in Wales, it allows me real access and a real welcome, and sometimes real abuse. It's quite funny. And I'll just one more really funny story. When I was writing about Tyddyn Gwer, which was the first holiday home burnt in Wales, outside Nevin, Nest, my wife and myself went for a little road trip. We went up to Tyddyn Gwer, got a picture, and then we went down to the local pub, Bryn Cynnan, as we said in the book, for a bowl of chips and a cup of tea. And then all these lads, local lads, obviously knew who I was. It was straight away, Rhys, Mwyn, Betty, Neida, Van In, what are you doing here? And when I sort of said, well, you're not going to believe this, but I've been researching Tyddyn Gwer, the first holiday home that was set alight. And they all laughed. This kind of tacit understanding of the second home issue. And that was a good example. We were definitely strangers in town, but I'm sort of lucky being Rhys Mwyn. 90% of the time it's good. 10% of the time it's, oi, Rhys Mwyn, you said this, you said that, or something. So there's a negative side to it, but I'm always aware of that. Our boys, our two adopted boys, are cofies of Carnarvon. But as a family, we moved in. It's a strange one, isn't it? People have always moved, always have.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rhys Mwyn, 90% Rhys Mwyn, 110% tell you the truth. Rhys, that's been absolutely terrific. We give you a round of applause, and everybody, come on, buy the book, buy the book.
A diolch am ddod. Thank you. As we say, there's nothing on telly anyway, but it's good that you've come along.
Tell us how to do it, Sarah. You've told us already. Diolch yn fawr.
I see Mick's unmuted, so I'll leave it to Mick.
I can just add that from Saturday there will be signed copies in Shop Ogwen in Bethesda, I understand. So if anyone wants to visit Bethesda, which is always worth a visit, then that would be great. Yeah, definitely. In the book, Rhys is 100% good, not just the 90% good. I'm glad that you managed to get back into the Zoom, Rhys. I feel that my comment about the internet earlier on in the introduction may just have jinxed things a bit, but such is the perils of doing all these things online. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming. It's been a wonderful evening. Nice to see fellow real authors Tony Curtis, Mike Parker, and Claire Dudman in the audience. Always good to see them. Always good to read their books, which are very, very good books indeed. And yeah, buy the book if you haven't already. I hope what you've heard tonight will encourage you to buy the book. And also, if you don't live in Gwynedd, to pay it a visit soon, because it's a place that everyone should know better, I think.
Sure.
So yeah, thank you very much. And stay safe and have a pleasant rest of the evening. Good night.
Os da.